Royce, I guess the question is, what happened to the separation of church and state? The governor calling this one of his favorite laws.
Well, this was clearly and is clearly part of an extreme right-wing Christian nationalist agenda, where it seems as though the governor and my colleagues who pushed this law did it with the intent to be sued and to challenge the right to put this kind of material in classrooms. I think the intent was to bring it up to the Supreme Court, where they are seeking to push this right-wing extreme Christian nationalist agenda. This has already been decided at the Supreme Court. This was tried over 40 years ago, where it was said clearly, we have a separation of church and state. And not only do we have a separation of church and state, the selection of the interpretation of the Ten Commandments is also problematic, because the version and the language that's been selected to be displayed is not one that everybody agrees upon. So it's just incredibly problematic. Like I said, it flies in the face of religious freedom. It flies in the face of the Constitution. You don't have to be a constitutional scholar to know this is clearly unconstitutional, but even more so, it's just unnecessary. There's language in the bill that requires it to be clearly legible and easily readable, but it's ignoring the fact that nearly 40% of kindergartners are not reading at grade level. The real focus should be emphasizing and teaching kids how to read and write, not indoctrinating them and with this type of moral agenda. And I find it interesting that many of the people who are pushing this are the same people who say that we shouldn't be trying to indoctrinate our children in classrooms. So I find it very hypocritical. I find it very problematic. We have a teacher shortage. I think this is going to contribute to making it more difficult to hire teachers. I think it's going to make it more problematic, and it's going to make many kids feel excluded. And again, I say this as a Christian and someone who learned the Ten Commandments growing up. I was raised Catholic, and I don't have an issue with the Ten Commandments. My issue is, and the issue of many, including those who subscribe to the Ten Commandments, is that it's clearly unconstitutional, it's unnecessary, it's extremist, and it flies in the face of religious freedom.
I do want to ask you what you will be telling families and students who are of another faith. For example, if they're of the Buddhist faith, this is not a part of their faith. How are you going to explain this, and how will you think teachers are going to have to start explaining this to the students?
Yeah, well, again, that's why this is just really problematic. I think that's the question that the governor needs to answer. I think that's a question that those who are pushing this and who passed this legislation need to answer, because I opposed this legislation from the outset because of those students that you just described, because of those families that you just described, because of those teachers that you just described. And let's take it a step further. In the Ten Commandments, it clearly says, "Thou shalt not kill." Well, I think the bill should have been amended to say "thou shalt not kill," except for when the Louisiana Department of Corrections is carrying out capital punishment. Because again, the same folks who are pushing for the Ten Commandments to be displayed are also the same folks who are pushing for the death penalty. So how do you reconcile that? How do you explain to a first grader to say "thou shalt not kill," except in instances when the Louisiana Department of Corrections is seeking to carry out capital punishment? It's just really problematic, and I think it's taken us further in the wrong direction as a state.
There are other commandments like "thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife," and should a kindergartner be asked about this, what does a teacher do as they go forward? Do you expect that to happen?
Another great question. This same legislative session, they passed another great question. This same legislative session, legislation was passed saying that you cannot discuss sex or sexuality or anything of that nature. So how do you reconcile those two things? It's just really problematic, very hypocritical, and just unnecessary and exclusionary. It's going to cause many more problems than it's actually going to solve, and we're going to waste taxpayer dollars as a state defending this in court. The state's probably going to lose, all to prove a point and to manufacture culture wars.